Jisoo stood at the large window of her control room, looking out at the forest she had spent 3 years creating. The trees stretched as far as she could see, their leaves showing the first hints of gold and red. It was different from the forests her grandmother used to tell her about back on Earth, but it was beautiful in its own way. She checked the weather controls on her computer screen again. Today was going to be special. After months of careful planning, she would make it snow for the first time on New Haven. Weather system check. All green, the computer announced in a soft voice. Jisoo smiled and took a sip of her warm tea. Other scientists on the colony thought she was strange for wanting to make snow. They said it was a waste of resources. The colony needed farmland and living spaces, not pretty forests with snow. But Jisoo remembered her grandmother's stories about walking through snowy forests in Korea, and how peaceful it felt. She pressed a few buttons on her control panel. The large machines hidden in the forest began to work. They would cool the air and create clouds, just like on Earth. Jisoo had tested this system many times, but never with real snow. Temperature dropping as planned, the computer said. Jisoo watched the numbers on her screen go down slowly. She had to be careful. If the temperature dropped too quickly, it could hurt the special trees she had planted. These trees were different from Earth trees. They had been changed to live on New Haven, where the air was a little different and the sun was not as bright. Jisoo and her team had worked hard to make them strong enough to handle snow. Through her window, she could see the sky getting cloudy. The white clouds were gathering above her forest, just as she had planned. Jisoo's heart beat faster with excitement. She had dreamed of this moment since she first arrived on New Haven. Her computer made a gentle beeping sound. Cloud density reaching optimal levels, it announced. Jisoo walked to the window and pressed her hand against the glass. The air outside was now cold enough that her breath made little foggy spots on the window. She smiled, remembering how she used to draw pictures in the fog on windows when she was little. Then she saw it, the first snowflake. It was small and seemed to dance in the air as it fell. Then another came, and another. Soon, hundreds of snowflakes were falling from the sky, floating gently down to the forest below. First snow recorded on New Haven, the computer noted, but Jisoo barely heard it. She was too busy watching the snow fall on her forest. The white flakes landed softly on the tree branches, making them look like they had been painted with tiny white dots. Jisoo put on her warm coat and walked outside. The air was cold and crisp, just like in her grandmother's stories. She held out her hand and caught a snowflake. It stayed there for a moment before melting, leaving a tiny drop of water in her palm. The snow was falling steadily now, covering the ground with a thin white blanket. The forest was quiet except for the soft sound of snowflakes landing on leaves. Jisoo took a deep breath of the cold air. It smelled fresh and clean, just like her grandmother had described. She started walking down the path that led into the forest. Her boots made soft crunching sounds in the new snow. Around her, the trees seemed to be welcoming their first winter, their branches reaching up to catch the falling snow. Jisoo stopped and looked back at her footprints in the snow. They were the first human footprints ever made in snow on New Haven. She took out her small camera and took a picture. She would send it to her grandmother on Earth. "Look," she would write, "I made it snow, just like in your stories." As the snow continued to fall, Jisoo felt a deep sense of peace. She had done more than just make it snow. She had brought a piece of Earth's beauty to this new world. And maybe someday other people's grandmothers would tell stories about walking through the snowy forests of New Haven. Jun arrived at New Haven on a quiet morning. His silver ship landed softly at the colony's main port, causing barely a ripple in the air. As a scientist from the Stellar Coalition, he had visited many human colonies before, but this one was different. This colony had something special that had caught the attention of his superiors: a snowy forest. He stepped out of his ship, his tall figure moving gracefully despite the stronger gravity of New Haven. The air here was colder than what he was used to, and he adjusted the temperature controls on his environmental suit. His people did not like cold weather. They preferred warm, efficient environments without any unnecessary weather changes. "Welcome to New Haven," said a colony official named Minji. "We have prepared your research station as requested." He-jun nodded politely. "Thank you. I would like to see the forest project immediately." Minji looked surprised. Most visitors wanted to rest after their long space journey, but she led him to a small vehicle anyway. They drove through the colony, passing rows of neat buildings and carefully planned farm fields. He-jun noticed that everything was organized in straight lines and perfect squares, except for one area ahead of them. The forest stood out like a painting among geometric shapes. It was wild and natural, with trees of different sizes growing in no particular pattern. And most interesting of all, it was covered in white. "Is that snow?" He-jun asked, trying to hide his curiosity. His people considered snow to be inefficient. It required energy to create and served no practical purpose. "Yes," Minji said proudly. "Ji-soo, our environmental specialist, created it. She's the first person to make real snow on another planet." They stopped at a building near the forest's edge. Through its large windows, He-jun could see someone working at a control panel. It was Ji-soo, though she didn't notice them at first. She was too busy watching the snowfall outside. Minji introduced them, and Ji-soo turned around with a warm smile. "Welcome to my forest," she said. "Would you like to see how the snow system works?" He-jun spent the next hour listening as Ji-soo explained her work. He was confused by many things. Why did she make the paths curve instead of going straight? Why did she let trees grow at random instead of planting them in rows? And most puzzling of all, why did she spend so much energy making frozen water fall from the sky? "But what is the purpose?" he finally asked. "How does this help the colony?" Ji-soo thought for a moment. "Not everything needs to have a practical purpose," she said. "Sometimes beauty is its own purpose. Would you like to take a walk in the snow? It might help you understand." He-jun wanted to say no. His people didn't waste time on unnecessary walks, but something about the way the snow fell silently among the trees made him curious. It was so different from the efficient, ordered world he knew. "Very well," he said. "A short walk for research purposes." As they stepped outside, a snowflake landed on his environmental suit. He-jun looked at it closely through his suit's sensors. It had a complex crystal structure, each arm of the snowflake exactly the same length. Perhaps there was some order in this chaos after all. Ji-soo watched him study the snowflake and smiled. She had seen that look before, the moment when someone first discovered the beauty in something they thought was pointless. Even a scientist from the most practical species in the galaxy could not resist the magic of the first snow. "Shall we?" she asked, pointing to the winding path that led into the forest. He-jun nodded, and together they walked into the snowy woods, their footprints making parallel tracks in the fresh snow. Every morning, when New Haven's sun was just rising, Ji-soo walked the same path through her snowy forest. She had designed this path herself, remembering the stories her grandmother told her about the forest paths near their home in Korea. The path curved gently between the trees, never going straight for too long. This morning, however, was different. He-jun was walking with her. "Why does the path turn so much?" He-jun asked. He was still wearing his environmental suit, but he had adjusted it to let him feel a little of the cold air. A straight path would be more efficient. Ji-soo smiled. She stopped and picked up a handful of snow, letting it fall slowly through her fingers. "On a straight path, you only see what's ahead of you," she said. "But on a curving path, every turn brings a new surprise." As if to prove her point, they rounded a bend and came upon a small clearing. The morning sun was shining through the snow-covered branches, making the snow sparkle like tiny stars. He-jun stopped walking and stared at the sight. "The light pattern is interesting," he said carefully. Ji-soo noticed he was taking pictures with his suit's sensors. They walked further along the path. Jisoo had placed wooden benches at certain spots, just like the ones her grandmother described from the old forests on Earth. Each bench sat in a perfect spot to watch the snow fall or see the sun shine through the trees. These resting spots are not necessary, Heijun said, but he sat down on one of the benches anyway. The walk is not long enough to require rest. They're not for resting, Jisoo explained. They're for stopping to look around. My grandmother used to say that sometimes you need to sit still to really see the beauty around you. Heijun was quiet for a moment. He watched as a few snowflakes fell on the bench beside him. Your grandmother seems very wise, he said finally. They continued their walk. Jisoo showed Heijun how she had planted different types of trees along the path. Some had dark bark that looked beautiful against the white snow. Others had branches that hung low, creating small snow-covered tunnels to walk through. In my grandmother's stories, Jisoo said, the forest paths always led to temples or special places, so I made this path lead to something special too. They turned another corner, and Heijun saw what she meant. The path opened up to a wide circle surrounded by the tallest trees in the forest. In the center stood a simple wooden structure, like a small temple. Snow had collected on its roof, making it look like it was wearing a white hat. This is where I come to think, Jisoo said, or sometimes just to listen to the snowfall. Heijun walked slowly around the circle, looking at everything with his careful scientist's eyes. You have created something very unusual here, he said, but his voice was softer than before. They stood there in the quiet morning, watching the snow fall around them. Heijun took more pictures with his suit's sensors, but Jisoo noticed he was no longer just recording data. He was trying to capture the beauty of the moment. When it was time to go back, they walked in comfortable silence. Their footprints from the walk-in now ran parallel to their new prints, making a pattern in the snow. Jisoo thought it looked like a story written in the snow, the story of two very different people walking the same path together. As they reached the edge of the forest, Heijun turned to Jisoo. Would it be acceptable if I joined you on your walk again tomorrow? He asked. For research purposes, of course. Jisoo smiled and nodded. She had a feeling that tomorrow's walk would bring even more surprises, even along the same familiar path. 1 week after Heijun's arrival, something unexpected happened in the snowy forest. Jisoo first noticed it during their morning walk. The snow was falling more heavily than usual, and the morning sun had not yet risen. They were walking with small lights to see the path ahead. Look at that, Jisoo said, stopping suddenly. She pointed at a tree branch where a snowflake had just landed. The spot where the snow touched the bark began to glow with a soft blue light. Heijun stepped closer, his suit's sensors working quickly to analyze what they saw. Fascinating, he said. The trees are responding to the snow in an unexpected way. They watched as more snowflakes fell. Each one that landed on the trees made a new spot of gentle light. Soon, the entire forest around them was filled with soft, glowing dots of blue and white light. It looked like the stars had fallen from the sky and landed in their forest. This was not part of your design, Heijun asked, looking at Jisoo. Jisoo shook her head. No. The trees must have changed themselves somehow. They've adapted to the snow in their own way. Heijun took samples and readings with his suit's equipment. The trees have developed a new chemical reaction, he explained. When the snow touches their bark, it triggers the cells to produce light. I have never seen anything like this before. They continued their walk, but now the path was lit by the glowing trees. The light was bright enough that they no longer needed their walking lights. Every time the wind blew and more snow fell, new lights appeared in the trees. It's beautiful, Jisoo said softly. She reached out and caught a snowflake in her hand. Where it melted on her glove, it left a tiny spot of light that slowly faded away. Heijun was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, My people believe that unexpected results are problems that need to be fixed. But this, he gestured at the glowing forest around them. This is not a problem. This is magic. Jisoo suggested with a smile. I was going to say an interesting scientific development. Hae-jun replied, but Jisoo could hear a smile in his voice too. They walked to the small temple in the forest circle. In the dark morning, with the glowing trees all around, it looked like a different place entirely. The snow on its roof caught the light from the trees and seemed to shine. We should study this, Hae-jun said. The trees have created something entirely new, something that exists nowhere else in the galaxy. Jisoo nodded. Yes, we should study it. But let's not change it. Some things should be allowed to remain magical. As they stood there, more snow began to fall. Each snowflake that landed on a tree added its own light to the forest. The light spread from tree to tree, branch to branch, until the whole forest was glowing softly in the dark morning. I must inform the Stellar Coalition about this discovery, Hae-jun said. But, he paused, but I think I will wait until tomorrow. For now, I would like to watch the snowfall. Jisoo smiled. The practical scientist who had arrived at New Haven a week ago would never have said such a thing. The forest had changed more than just the trees. Together, they stood in the glowing forest, watching the snow bring light to the darkness. Every snowflake that fell was a small miracle, a tiny spark of magic in their peaceful morning walk. The glowing forest became famous across New Haven. People came from all parts of the colony to see it, but Jisoo and Hae-jun still had their quiet morning walks together. During these walks, they shared stories about their different worlds. One peaceful morning, as they sat on their favorite bench watching the glowing snowfall, Jisoo told Hae-jun about winter festivals on Earth. In Korea, we celebrated the first snow every year, she said. Children would make snowmen and have snowball fights. Families would drink hot chocolate and eat warm, sweet bread together. Hae-jun listened carefully. He had removed the face shield of his environmental suit, though he still needed it for warmth. My people have no celebrations for weather, he said, but we do have festivals to honor beautiful mathematics. When a particularly elegant equation is discovered, we gather to study its patterns. Jisoo smiled at this. That sounds beautiful in its own way. Can you show me one of these patterns? Hae-jun bent down and began drawing in the snow with his finger. The pattern he made looked like a series of connecting shapes, each one flowing perfectly into the next. This equation describes the movement of light through crystals, he explained. We find beauty in the way numbers can capture such complex things so simply. It looks like a dance, Jisoo said, looking at the pattern. She reached down and drew her own pattern next to his. This is a traditional Korean pattern. We use it in our art and clothing. See how the lines flow together, just like in your equation. Hae-jun studied her drawing carefully. The ratios between the curves are remarkably similar, he noted. Perhaps beauty follows the same mathematical rules, no matter where it comes from. They continued their walk, and Jisoo showed Hae-jun how to make a snowball. At first, he thought it was strange to pick up snow and shape it with your hands. But soon he was carefully crafting perfectly round snowballs, using his knowledge of spherical geometry. On my world, Hae-jun said as they walked, we build everything to be perfect and efficient. Nothing is allowed to grow randomly or change unexpectedly. He looked at the glowing trees around them. But I am beginning to see that there can be perfection in unexpected things too. Jisoo stopped to watch a snowflake fall. It landed on a branch, creating a new point of light. My grandmother used to say that the most beautiful things in life are the ones we don't plan, she said. Like this forest. We planned the trees and the snow, but we didn't plan the light. It came as a gift. Hae-jun nodded slowly. My people would say this was an error in the system, but now I think perhaps we need to change our definition of what makes something correct. They reached the small temple, which had become even more beautiful since the trees began to glow. The light from the snow made patterns on its walls, creating shapes that looked like a mixture of Hae-jun's equations and Jisoo's traditional patterns. Tomorrow, Hae-jun said, Would you teach me more about your Earth festivals? In return, I can show you how we calculate the perfect shape of a snowflake. I think perhaps both kinds of knowledge are important. Jisoo agreed happily. As they stood in the glowing forest, she realized that something special was happening. It wasn't just the trees that were changing and growing. Through their daily walks and shared stories, two very different cultures were finding common ground in the quiet beauty of a snowy morning. One special evening, when New Haven's sun had set and the forest was dark, Jisoo invited Hejun for a night walk. The weather computers had predicted the heaviest snowfall yet, and she wanted to see how the glowing trees would look. I have adjusted my environmental suit for night viewing, Hejun said as they met at the forest entrance. The light patterns from the trees have become stronger each day. They walked into the forest together. The snow was falling heavily, and everywhere a snowflake touched a tree, it created a bright point of light. But tonight was different. Instead of simple dots of light, the trees were creating patterns. Look, Jisoo said softly, pointing at a large tree. As the snow fell on its branches, the lights formed a pattern that looked exactly like the traditional Korean design she had drawn in the snow days before. Hejun stepped closer, his suit's sensors working quickly. The pattern is precise, he said with surprise. It matches your drawing exactly. But how is this possible? Jisoo watched as more patterns appeared on other trees. Each one showed a different traditional Korean design, glowing softly in the darkness. I think I know, she said slowly. When I created these trees, I used old Korean textile patterns as part of their genetic code. I thought it would be a nice way to include my heritage in the forest. But I never expected the patterns to show up like this. Hejun studied the glowing designs with great interest. The trees have activated that part of their genetic code in response to the snow, he explained. They are expressing your cultural patterns through light. This is extraordinary. As they continued their walk, the entire forest began to fill with glowing patterns. Some looked like flowing water, others like clouds or mountains. Each pattern told a story from Jisoo's cultural heritage, written in light against the dark forest. When they reached the small temple, they found it surrounded by the most beautiful display yet. The trees around the circle had created a pattern that looked like a traditional Korean garden, complete with glowing paths and flowing streams of light. Your grandmother's stories, Hejun said suddenly. You told me she described walking through temple gardens in the snow. You have recreated that memory here, in the genes of these trees. Jisoo nodded, feeling tears in her eyes. I never thought it would work like this. I just wanted to bring a small piece of home to this new world. Hejun was quiet for a moment, watching the patterns shift and change as more snow fell. My people believe that the most perfect designs come from mathematical formulas, he said. But these patterns, born from your culture and memories, they have a different kind of perfection. They have meaning beyond their shapes. They stood together in the glowing garden of light, watching as the snow continued to fall. Each snowflake helped tell Jisoo's story, creating a bridge between Earth's past and New Haven's future. Tomorrow, Hejun said, I must report this to the Stellar Coalition. They will want to study how cultural information can be encoded into living things. He paused, then added, but I think they will learn more than just science from your forest. Jisoo smiled. She knew that on this night, in this glowing forest, they were witnessing something that was both science and magic, both memory and discovery. Her grandmother's stories had traveled across the stars to create something entirely new. News about the glowing patterns in Jisoo's forest spread quickly through the galaxy. 3 days after the Night of Lights, important officials from the Stellar Coalition arrived at New Haven. They came in large silver ships that gleamed in the morning sun. Jisoo watched from her control room as the officials prepared to visit the forest. She felt nervous. These visitors were used to perfect, efficient worlds. Would they understand her forest's special magic? Hejun came to stand beside her at the window. Do not worry, he said. I have already sent them my report. They are very interested in your work. The coalition officials wore environmental suits like Hojun's, but theirs were more elaborate, with gold trim and special markings. They walked with careful, measured steps as Jisoo led them into the forest. "Please explain your original purpose for this project," the lead official asked. His name was Taiho, and he was the head of the coalition's science council. Jisoo took a deep breath. "I wanted to create a place of peace and beauty," she said simply. "A place where people could walk in the snow and remember the forests of Earth." Taiho made notes on his computer. "But the resource cost is high," he said. "The energy needed for snow, the space used for trees that serve no practical purpose." Hojun stepped forward. "If I may speak," he said, "I too thought this forest was inefficient when I first arrived. But I have learned that efficiency is not the only measure of value." As if to support his words, snow began to fall. The officials watched in silence as the trees began to glow, creating their beautiful patterns of light. The Korean designs flowed across the forest like a story being told in light and shadow. One of the officials reached out and caught a snowflake on her suit. Where it landed, it left a small point of light that slowly faded away. "Extraordinary," she whispered. "The patterns are precise," Taiho noted, studying them with his instruments. "They follow mathematical principles while expressing cultural information. This is a new form of data storage we had not considered." Jisoo smiled. "They are more than data," she said. "They are memories, stories, and feelings, all combined with science to create something new." The officials spent hours in the forest, taking readings and making notes. But Jisoo noticed that as time passed, they began to simply watch the snowfall. Even Taiho stopped taking notes and stood quietly, looking at the glowing patterns. "We came to evaluate the scientific value of this project," Taiho said finally. "But we have found something more valuable. We have found a way to combine science and culture, efficiency and beauty." Hojun nodded. "This forest teaches us that the most interesting discoveries happen when we allow for unexpected possibilities," he said, "when we make space for wonder." The officials agreed to not only maintain the forest, but to protect it as a special place of cultural and scientific importance. They wanted to learn more about how Jisoo had encoded cultural information into the tree's genes. As the officials left, Haejun turned to Jisoo. "Your grandmother's stories have taught the most advanced scientific minds in the galaxy a new way of thinking," he said. "That is a great achievement." Jisoo looked at her forest, glowing softly in the falling snow. She thought about how a simple wish to remember her grandmother's stories had created something that helped two very different cultures understand each other better. 1 year had passed since the first snow fell in Jisoo's forest. The trees had grown taller, and their glowing patterns had become even more beautiful. The small temple in the forest circle now had a new name: the meeting place of two worlds. On this special morning, Jisoo stood at her control room window, watching as visitors from across the galaxy arrived at New Haven. The Stellar Coalition had chosen her forest as the location for a new cultural exchange program. People from many different worlds came to walk in the snow and share their stories. Haejun, who now lived permanently on New Haven as the Coalition's chief researcher, joined her at the window. "The first group is ready," he said. "Shall we begin our walk?" Together, they led a small group into the forest. Some visitors wore environmental suits like Hojun's, while others walked freely in the cold air. All of them fell silent as they entered the glowing forest. "This path was designed based on my grandmother's stories," Jisoo explained to the group. "She told me about walking through snowy forests in Korea and how each turn in the path brought new surprises." A young visitor from a distant planet reached out to touch a glowing tree branch. "We have no snow on my world," she said softly. "I never understood why humans wrote so many stories about it, but now I see why." Haejun pointed out the mathematical patterns in the falling snow, explaining how they connected to the cultural designs in the tree's light. "Science and culture are not separate things," he told the group. "They are different ways of understanding the same wonder." As they walked, each visitor shared stories from their own worlds. One spoke of crystal gardens that sang in the wind. Another described forests that bloomed only once every 100 years. Each story added to the magic of the moment. When they reached the temple, Jisoo saw something new. The trees around the circle were creating patterns she had never seen before. The lights had combined the Korean designs with mathematical formulas from Haejun's world, creating something entirely new and beautiful. "The trees are learning," Haejun said with excitement. "They are combining different cultural patterns to create new ones. Your forest is not just preserving stories anymore. It is helping create new ones." Jisoo thought about how much had changed since she first dreamed of making it snow on New Haven. What began as a way to remember her grandmother's stories had become a bridge between worlds, a place where different species and cultures could share their own stories and understand each other better. "My grandmother once told me that the best stories never really end," Jisoo said to the group. "They just become part of new stories." That evening, after the visitors had left, Jisoo and Haejun took their usual walk through the forest. The snow was falling softly, and the trees glowed with their mixed patterns of Earth's culture and coalition mathematics. "Your grandmother would be proud," Haejun said. "You have created more than a forest. You have created a place where wonder brings people together." Jisoo smiled as she watched the snowfall. Somewhere on Earth, her grandmother was probably telling stories about her granddaughter who made a forest of light on another world. And here on New Haven, new stories were beginning, written in snow and light, and the shared wonder of all who walked these paths. The forest had become more than either Jisoo or Haejun had imagined. It was now a place where the magic of snow could help different worlds understand each other, one peaceful walk at a time.